Audio recording for this meeting has begun.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Leanne Bryan. I'm with the National Center on Subsidy Innovation and Accountability, getting us kicked off here on our third Program Integrity webinar of the series. This is actually the second offering of this webinar. If you happen to participate in our June 9th session, maybe you have some additional strategies to share today, or maybe you came away with some questions that we can help to answer today. We have a lot of content to cover, including hearing from our colleagues in Ohio's Lucas County Fraud Unit, so we are going to get right to it. A couple logistics that I got to cover. We are using the Adobe Connect platform. We had a little bit of practice there at the start, just kind of typing into those chat boxes or chat pods. We do hope for an engaging conversation this afternoon. We can unmute you, so if anyone has a question that they would like further clarification on, you can feel free to raise your hand using the hand raising icon at the top of your screen. And if you are connected via audio, either through your computer speakers or if you dialed in via phone, then we can unmute you. But otherwise, we encourage lots of good discussion within the chat box. In the lower right corner of your screen, you see a Program Integrity Resources pod. Those are some of our more relevant resources related to this particular webinar. Feel free to download those at any time throughout the session. You are all muted, but again, you can raise your hand if you need to ask a question or get a little bit more clarification. If you should have any, something just went full screen. Can we get that back? Thank you. If you should have any Adobe Connect or other issues, you may reach out to Heidi Freimiller, and her contact information is shown there. All right, so here are the faces and the outstanding team here at the National Center on Subsidy Innovation and Accountability that specialize in CCDF program integrity. So our center provides a variety of subsidy-related technical assistance to CCDF lead agencies, but this group of folks is all about program integrity strategies and how those strategies can benefit our child care programs. So that's me on the left, Leanne Bryan, manager of the program integrity work here at NICSIA. Next up is Anne Renaud Avila. She is our fiscal subject matter expert with a wealth of budget office experience. Janae Broadway, she was a fraud manager in her most recent state government work and brings a ton of CCDF fraud prevention and detection strategies to us that we can apply here at the national level. Katie Watts, Katie is our national error rate expert. If you happen to be involved in your agency's error rate or improper payment process, then you likely know Katie or are familiar with her name. And finally, last but certainly not least, is Michael McKenzie. Mike also has years of state government experience, and he most recently was the section chief for the Fraud Investigation, Recovery, and Enforcement section in his home state. Now I'm going to move us to the agenda. Janae is going to lead us off with some front-end detection strategies and benefits, which will include a quick review of CCDF regs and elements that contribute to an effective Fed system. Mike will then walk us through effective investigation strategies and benefits. Katie's going to talk to us briefly about fraud cases and what their impact may be on the error rate process. Then, very pleased that Greg Hayes from Ohio, he's going to be with us this afternoon and sharing what I believe is a fascinating presentation on Lucas County's fraud unit and cover topics related to identifying forged pay stubs. Lots of great examples in his presentation today, gathering evidence and pursuing prosecution. Finally, as time permits, Janae will demo one of our two newest Fraud Toolkit sections. And again, all of the Fraud Toolkits are available in the Program Integrity Resources pod. Feel free to download those at any time. And then Janae will also cover some additional available resources and open it up to additional discussion. But again, at any time throughout the session, please feel free to type in questions or raise your hand. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Janae.
Thanks, Leanne. All right, so to get us started today, we'll begin with, as Leanne stated, an internal controls activity known as the front-end detection system. On the next few slides, we'll discuss a few basic elements for an effective and efficient front-end detection system and strategies for developing an effective and efficient front-end detection system. All right. So for this part of the presentation or this discussion, we wanted to bring to your attention a specific federal regulation located at 9868A3, which states, or which requires lead agencies to have in place processes to train child care providers and staff of the lead agency and other agencies engaged in the administration of CCDF about program requirements and integrity. Now, this federal regulation or federal requirement plays a major role in building and maintaining an effective and efficient front-end detection system. And if you've attended any of our prior program integrity webinars, then you've heard me say more often than not that there's not a one-size-fits-all strategy for lead agencies. And this is simply because the lead agency's needs and missions and goals are inherently different at some point in the CCDF administration. And those states' respective communities, including their parishes or counties, have different needs. But like Leanne said, what we want to do today is provide you guys a few elements that can assist the lead agency across the board in general when developing a front-end detection system. Now, before I get into the front-end detection system elements that are on your screen, I'd like to explain why we categorize the front-end detection system as an internal control element. So in the United States GAO, the Government Accountability Office Standards of Internal Controls, also known as the Green Book, it defines an internal control as encompassing the plans, methods, policies, and procedures used to fulfill the mission, the strategic plan, goals, and objectives of an entity. The internal control serves as the first line of defense in safeguarding assets. So with that being said, an effective and efficient front-end detection system acts as the first line of defense and should be aligned with the lead agency's mission, strategic plan, goals, and objectives. So with that in mind, when developing a front-end detection system to be utilized as an internal control activity, consider these three controlled elements: environment, operations, and outcome. And the reason why we've labeled these controlled is because the lead agency ultimately has control of each of these activities. Now, let's look at some strategies for each of these elements and get a better understanding on how these elements work in your front-end detection system. Beginning with the control environment. So this starts with leadership, management, and supervisors. They all set the tone and climate within the agency. And when we talk about the climate and tone, this is what we're talking specifically to the domino effect, the top-down domino effect. The attitudes and dedication of the staff and the providers are a reflection of the lead agency's management, leadership, and supervisors' actions or no actions as it relates to integrity and program requirements. So remember, when establishing a front-end detection system, the old saying, do as I say and not as I do, oversight by leadership, management, or supervisors will not assist the lead agency in maintaining an effective and efficient internal front-end detection system, and ultimately deteriorates the purpose of the internal control activity. Next, we have the automated process. And we're talking about system edits and alerts, not the red flag reports, because the red flag reports, usually those are not produced for a day or a month or even at quarterly reports, but we're talking about real-time system alerts that provide discrepancy notifications. such notifications, eligibility notification that will alert staff and supervisors that, for example, a child on a new application is already active on another case, or a payment edit or coding that will not allow a duplicate payment to go out the door manually or electronically, and also sends a notification to the appropriate staff, a supervisor or management or leadership, to let them know, hey, this attempt was made in the system. Next on our list, we have the agency and child care provider partnership. So we're talking about building those constructive relationships with your child care providers and helping them to understand the program requirements and how fraud, waste, and abuse affects the community and funding. And in return, utilizing those relationships to deter, detect, and prevent fraud in places where the lead agency technically would not have eyes and ears. And last and certainly not least is the screening and interviewing of the front line. So during this process, you want to make sure that you're selecting individuals in confidence that they can and will commit to the program requirements and integrity. And remember, that front line spans across administration and operation. So we've listed a few of the front line here on your screen, which includes your eligibility worker, your eligibility workers, your quality control staff, contractors, vendors, and subrecipients. So now that we've discussed the controlled environment, let's talk about controlled operations. So when we're talking about controlled operations, it's basically training and communication. So you're training your frontline staff on fraud, waste, and abuse and the program requirements as the regs stated, but you're also communicating with them their roles and their responsibilities and what the expectations are, in addition to the agency's goals and missions. And after the controlled operations, we have the control outcomes, which are those activities, the leadership activities, what's done and what's not done, right? The actions taken and no actions taken. So your enforcement activities include the monitoring of your providers, your staff, contractors, subrecipients, etc. Having those regular meetings and check-ins, posting those newsletters and bulletins about the agency activities as it relates to the program requirements and fraud, and letting individuals see those verbal actions that include the staff and other stakeholders, the verbal actions taken when non-compliant activities are made aware, when they're brought to the foresight to the lead agency. So now that we've reviewed the three controlled elements, let's look at what some of the states, some of your peers are doing. So here we actually went into the state plan to pull some responses, and these are dedicated to the training, right? So here we have training of providers, and Kansas advises here that child care providers are required to complete an online training and are provided a provider handbook. Also, Kansas Overpayment Detection and Prevention Unit provides a one-on-one training in conjunction with attendance record review. Now, another item that I found interesting in Kansas activity is the beginning of an educational approach to inform and train providers. This could easily build one of those constructive relationships. And next, there's California when it comes to training providers. So California Field Service Office provides webinars, in-person training, and workshops at various conferences and meetings across the state. So for our next state response, we're looking at how staff members are trained of the lead agency. So for this one, we pulled Wisconsin and South Carolina. Wisconsin here stated that they provide a specific training with 5 guiding principles. So this goes back to that same way I indicated there's no one-size-fits-all strategy. Here, Wisconsin has developed these 5 guiding principles of program integrity, which include prevention, detection, investigation, sanction, and collection, and that's provided to their staff, right, their lead agency staff, while South Carolina provides an eligibility and program integrity tutorial to all
Janae, this is Leanne. It sounds like we lost your audio.
Now, while these state responses are to the compliance questions within the CCDF plan, the activities and strategies are directly related to one or more of the previously discussed front-end detection control elements. So now let's look at the benefits of a front-end detection system. So we labeled it the PAM-CAM, and the reason for this label was one, the frontline individuals represent your multi-surveillance camera system, watching and ready to alert the agency of possible discrepancies. And secondly, the PAM-CAM, actually the acronym highlights some of the top benefits of having an effective and efficient front-end detection system. And those benefits include preventing ineligible individuals from being approved for benefits, the administrative savings that you receive from having that effective front line, including the recouping activities you would have to go after for improper payments, investigation activities as well. In addition, you're maintaining a staff that is committed to the process of deterring and preventing fraud, waste, and abuse, and communicating to the community and other stakeholders that the agency's staff are practicing good stewardship, safeguarding federal funds, and you also have an opportunity to assess the effectiveness and mitigate any gaps in eligibility and payment processing through the tracking of your Fed's referral. And that's your front-end detection system referrals. And overall, you're minimizing those improper payments. So let's have a short discussion about it. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ann.
Okay, great. Thank you, Janae, and thank you everyone for joining us today. So we have a small group here today, so please feel free to either jump in and answer these questions on the chat pods, or if you'd like to, you can raise your hand. But we'd like to hear from you all whether or not your agency provides provides fraud training to all staff, what front-end detection strategies your agency has implemented, and then if you want to share any of the results of your front-end detection strategies that you've implemented, that'd be great as well. So thank you.
Don't see anyone typing. This is Leanne. Can
Yeah.
we get some responses?
Yeah, if you provide fraud training, what does it look like? Is it online, in person? How often do you do it? If you could share that, that'd be great. So Sandra Wagner responded that for front-end detection strategies, they have red flag reports and investigators. And we have a few states online on the phone today that says that they do not provide fraud training. We have 3 states that have said they do not do that. And then Shaka Bedgood replied that billing discrepancies based on capacity and timing are reviewed, and they also have investigators as well for front-end detection. For fraud training, Greg Hayes shared that Ohio attends 2 quarterly in-person trainings facilitated by the state of Ohio, as well as annual statewide conferences for all of Ohio. So we'll give it just another minute here. Thank you all for the answers that you've shared so far. And then Gwen Snyder-Gill shared that in Texas, they actually offer they have a specific department that offers in-person training and is available for any questions that come up, and that the trainings are provided periodically through the year. And then for front-end detection strategies, the last question there, we have a response from Sandra Wagner that they monitor billings prior to payments. And Shaka Bedgood also said that numerous discrepancies and overbills have been discovered on their end and that they've recouped thousands of dollars as well. So thank you all so much for the responses, and with that I will turn it over to Mike for the next section.
Thanks a lot, Ann. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We heard some really good strategies about preventing fraud on the front end, but inevitably some fraud and improper payments are going to occur. So I want to discuss some tips for fraud investigations with you today. CCDF regulations at 45 CFR 98.68 require that we investigate and recover fraudulent payments. But you have discretion in terms of deciding what warrants an investigation. Now, sometimes you're going to uncover fraudulent activity. Sometimes you're going to discover that an improper payment occurred that wasn't fraudulent. But keep in mind that you might never have even discovered that improper payment if you had not conducted an investigation in the first place. So you're still deriving some program savings from your activities. So why conduct these investigations? There's lots of good reasons for it. First of all, we have a fiduciary responsibility to protect funds for the program and assure taxpayers that the right benefits are going to the right people. Additionally, many agencies are administering not only CCDF but other programs. So it's an opportunity to combine your investigation efforts, since many of the same questions about income and household composition will apply to both or more programs. And finally, fraud investigation is not necessarily the first task that most caseworkers want to tackle. They'd rather determine eligibility and manage cases. So if you can, designate fraud work to staff with a specific skill set to do the job most effectively, and allow your caseworkers to focus on eligibility functions. Agencies have options for completing fraud investigations. You can use in-house staff for local project areas or statewide. Now keep in mind that there are a variety of good training options for these staff that you can do either online or bring folks in for a day or two. Some agencies have chosen to contract with local law enforcement or even private agencies for conducting investigations, surveillance, or training of staff. If you do this, be sure the contract addresses their responsibility for any hearings or appeals related to the work that they would do. Most investigations can be conducted from your desk these days. There's lots of good resources available at your fingertips. Social media sites like Facebook or Instagram. I'm sure many investigators on the call today can attest to finding information on these sites related to unreported income or household composition. And take advantage of other agencies in your state with valuable information they're likely willing to share as well. Now, this may require a data sharing agreement, but it's worth it. Agencies like the Department of Motor Vehicles, Labor, Energy, chances are if somebody's committing CCDF fraud, it's pretty likely they're cheating other programs as well. It's also a great opportunity to establish relationships with your other cabinet agencies. And then consider investigative tools like Accurate or Clear to provide you with extensive information about individuals' income, assets, household location, and composition. You may have to dig deeper to verify some of this information, but it's going to point you in the right direction. Now, while we all don't have the capacity to allocate this many positions to support program integrity, here's an example of what Wisconsin's lead agency has established to investigate and collect improper payments for providers. Their Bureau of Program Integrity is comprised of just over 20 staff, and they manage provider program integrity activities for the entire state. When it comes to recipient program integrity, Wisconsin's lead agency conducts fraud investigations for Milwaukee, and they provide guidance and technical assistance to the balance of the state. Now keep in mind that except for Milwaukee, Wisconsin is state supervised and locally administered by counties and tribes. Milwaukee is also Wisconsin's largest county and comprises just over 50% of the state's CCDF caseload, according to April data from 2020. Okay, results. Results are important, folks. They can help you show your administration, lawmakers, and the public how much of an impact your program integrity efforts are making. Wisconsin has described in their state plan how quickly they track provider and parent investigations and the results of those investigations. Recipient fraud investigation information is tracked in one system for all of their public assistance programs. Please keep in mind that the Office of Child Care expects to see a description of the results of your program integrity actions and activities as part of your next state plan submissions. Reach out to your regional office if you have questions about what is expected exactly. I wanted to show you a few examples of what Wisconsin provided in their current state plan submission related to provider and parent program integrity results. By using the data from their tracking system, they were able to readily provide data regarding the number of referrals, investigations, improper payments, and intentional program violations adjudicated. Now, this is the kind of data that can also help OCC make the case for additional funding to support program integrity efforts for all states in the future. If you have any questions about what I presented, please send them back via the chat box, and we'll try to answer them today or we'll get back to you. But I'm going to turn this over to Ann now for another brief discussion about what we talked about today. Thank you.
This is Leanne. Sorry about the mix-up here. It looks like Ann lost audio, and I'm not able to get her back.
I'm sorry. I do have audio. I just I'm here. I didn't have a chat screen. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, great. So thank you all. So and thank you, Mike. It would be great if you could share now some of the ways you track the results of your investigations and how you go about measuring those results. Great, so it looks like some of you are typing in the chat box. So Brenda the bonus Luke, sorry if I didn't pronounce that right, she says that they keep a spreadsheet of all referrals and recoupments to help measure the results of their investigations. And then Greg Hayes shared that Ohio tracks collection data monthly and annually using other Ohio counties similar in size as a comparison. And then what about tracking investigation results? Does anybody have anything they'd like to share there? Okay, we'll give it another minute if anybody wants to answer. Otherwise, we can turn it over to Katie. So Greg Hayes says that Ohio logs all complaints, assignments, and results quarterly in Excel to track their investigation results. And Janae asked, has your agency ever needed to review or change a policy or procedure because of an investigation outcome? Any responses on that one? Okay, well, thank you all for responding, and now we will turn it over to Katie Watts to talk about error rate.
Thank you. So the CCDF error rate review, for those on the call who might not be familiar with it, is a process where states review a sample of their cases, child care case records, to assess whether eligibility was determined correctly and if any improper payments were made. So this review is really focused on eligibility determination, that process. Obviously, as you know from our program integrity webinar series, we are very interested in monitoring and detecting fraud, but it does not fall under the scope of this particular review. But sometimes the topic of fraud does come up, particularly as it relates to sampling for the error rate review. So I wanted to take a couple minutes to address some of these questions that we've had. So if you have been involved with the review, you may know that the cases we include in our samples are those that have had a CCDF payment made for services received during a particular sample month. So the question has come up if fraud or suspected fraud cases should be included in the sampling universe, and if they're selected, should they be reviewed? And this might include cases that are currently under investigation or were previously under investigation. The answer to that question is yes. They should be included in the sampling universe, and if they're drawn, they should be reviewed. Again, as long as there was a payment made for services received in the sample month, they should be included. Now, if you select a case and find out that the file is unavailable, if you cannot access it since it is being investigated for fraud, then you may request a replacement case from your regional office. But fraud in itself is not a valid reason for requesting a replacement case. So if a fraud case is selected, it should be reviewed just like any other. Focus on what occurred during the eligibility determination or redetermination. You might know that there was an intentional program violation, but think about what the eligibility worker would have known at the time of determination and whether they acted correctly based on what was known at that time. And one more thing, as you see on the left, if you or someone else on your team is reviewing a case and you suspect fraud, we ask that you would continue to review, again, just as I described, but of course, do refer the matter as appropriate. So are there any questions about how fraud relates to our error rate review? I will pause for a moment. see someone is typing, so I'm going to hold on for a moment. Right. Well, in the interest of time, I am going to move on, and I'm not sure who I turn it over to at this point, so I'm sorry. Should I be turning it over to the...
I believe
Janae
turn
is
it
going
over
to
to
introduce Ohio? To Janae, okay. Thank you. I wasn't sure who was introducing.
That's okay, it's me. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Greg Hayes, who's an investigator from Ohio, from Lucas County Job and Family Services. Greg?
You got it. That's right. Thanks, Janae. All right. So as Janae said, I'm an investigator for Lucas County Job and Family Services. I specialize specifically in the criminal cases, so the fraud cases that turn up in our unit, they get sent to me. I prepare them for prosecution and see them through to sentencing. So a little background, a little housekeeping. Lucas County is a metro county. We have close to between 400,000 and 500,000 as a population. About 73,000 individuals on food assistance, and respectively, as far as child care, towards the bottom of the slide, we have roughly 3,800 families receiving child care in Lucas County. The type of cases that are sent to court with regard to the crime involved are theft, forgery, illegal use of SNAP, tampering with records, and those are all outlined in the Ohio Revised Code. Currently, our caseload as far as prosecutions go, I have about 20 cases pending in court, and then roughly 30 or 40 that are actively being investigated. And since we started actively pursuing prosecutions in July of 2017, we've prosecuted almost $1.5 million worth of cases. Front-end detection. So for us, it starts with the front lines communicating. We often have meetings with frontline staff, caseworkers, where we'll go in the individual units and just tell them what we're seeing, and then also give them some case history, those types of things, just to keep them abreast of what's going on within our unit. So communication and keeping that relationship open as far as communication goes is really important to us. And then just give them ideas of things we're seeing, things that are coming across our desk, any trends or anything like that. And that if we do get a referral that leads to a large indictment, we like to kind of give them a pat on the back and let them know that what they're doing is actually, it's very helpful to us. So they're one of the major sources of our cases, so we definitely want to give them credit where credit is due. Talking about our strategies, our reports are very important to our investigations. It's a living document, so you definitely want to leave space for things to be adjusted as you go through your investigation, but also keeping in mind that you have to have a consistent format. Grammatical errors, typos, those types of things, you definitely want to review those before you're going to be submitting anything to the prosecutor's office. So we like to keep things consistent as far as the way that the document looks, and then also communicate with other staff frequently if there's any changes that need to be made or anything like that. We're open to that type of thing. And I think the most important thing to mention as far as the report is the actual timeline of what you're doing, not just the timeline of what took place with the investigation, but the timeline with respect to every action that you are taking, making sure you're documenting that on the report. And interviewing, another some things that I guess I try to hone my skills on with respect to interviewing is just making sure I'm prepared, reviewing the evidence. So basically just doing your homework before you talk to the person that you want to interview, and then making sure you know what you want to accomplish before you set out to interview them. And tactically, when interviewing an individual, I would say don't be afraid to let there be space between questions and answers. And then you typically have to adjust or adapt to the type of personalities that you're going to encounter. Just kind of common sense stuff, but just things to keep in mind. As far as our strategies go, we use subpoenas frequently to get information, public record searches. As Mike was saying, a lot of the things we do can be done from the desk. I find it important to maintain a record of contacts and try to build relationships with people that I'm working with respect to some of the employers or other agencies in the area that can typically make things a little easier when you're dealing with the same person as far as getting information from them. As far as analysis goes, I use spreadsheets, Excel a lot in order to analyze any data I might be receiving from banks, that type of thing. So I also keep in mind that I have to summarize my method. So I'm in my report before getting submitted to a prosecutor, I am summarizing my method. So I'm just letting them know scientifically how I came to that conclusion, what did I do to get to that conclusion, just kind of explaining that. And then again, staying informed, making sure you're abreast with policy and any type of internal policies, and then the policies that are handed down from the powers that be, criminal code, and then if you're dealing with prosecutions, you definitely want to know legal procedures in your county. And all of this stuff is outlined in our county has a fraud plan that we drafted, so we keep the work that we're doing consistent. And presenting cases to a prosecutor. So the important part here is making sure that you, sorry, I lost audio there for a second, making sure that you meet with your prosecutor and that you get an idea of what they want from you, and then you can kind of incorporate that into your summaries, or you can figure out what kind of evidence that they want to see, how they want it, basically how do they want it packaged. In Lucas County, I have one prosecutor that I deal with as far as presenting cases to grand jury, so I have a good relationship with that individual. I know what he likes to see, so I make sure it looks that way before it gets to him to review for setting up for grand jury. Now on the other side of things, if I get an indictment, I have, because it's a metro county, I have 20 to 30 different personalities to deal with, so that can be a little bit more complicated. I have to stay on top of those individuals, and I mentioned babysitting, and it feels a lot like that. And I'm very direct with those individuals about what I expect to get out of the case, because remember, it's your case. You put a lot of the work and the blood and sweat into it, so you definitely don't want to feel like you're walking away empty-handed. What type of cases do we refer? Again, I mentioned the types of crimes that we typically indict, but our criteria is it has to be a felony, so in most cases it has to be a theft case of $1,000 and over, and then anything involving a forgery or tampering is an automatic referral, irregardless of the amount. Our hotline is critical to our operation. We monitor the hotline pretty much around the clock while we're there, and some of our largest cases have come through the hotline, so it's pretty much a mandatory thing that when the phone rings on that hotline, somebody's there to pick it up, and if that person's gone, then we make sure we have coverage on that phone. Again, I mentioned communication with line staff, so this is pretty much the same thing. Whenever we have a big case or news to share, we make sure it gets out in the global email, and then we do take the time every quarter to meet with the different units within our building to make sure they're aware of what's going on. And then to the meat of the presentation here with regards to fake documents, specifically fake pay stubs, tips on how to identify a fake pay stub. It's kind of difficult because a lot of what we see is really good. It's unless you get a tip or unless you have somebody come in and basically say that this person's submitting fake pay stubs, you need to take a look at it. You're really not going to know in most instances. Now, however, there are some instances where things can be a little off, and you look at something on the pay stub and it just seems off, and that might be as much of a prompt as you need to go ahead and submit that pay stub to the employer and try to verify whether or not it's legit. So those types of things might be the alignment, spacing, fields in the pay stub that information should be there, but it's not. The math, is the math correct? Some employers in the area that are large employers, you might have an idea of what the formatting of that pay stub should look like, and perhaps what you're looking at isn't the same. So all those types of things that are in front of you are things that you need to pay attention to, and it doesn't hurt to try. And basically, if you see something that looks a little off, the worst thing that could happen is you just double checked and we're able to verify that it is indeed a real pay stub in the worst case scenario. And then again, some other things here, basically doing the math. Caseworkers are busy, they're overloaded, so we try to encourage them to just take a glance at the pay stubs and look and do the math in their head. If things look like they're off as far as the math goes, if they have time to run the numbers on those pay stubs, they are, if there's an error on that pay stub, then chances are it's a fraudulent document. So I'm going to basically look through some of these pay stubs with you. I'm going to have some examples here to show you. And again, these are just some tips that I've probably already mentioned. In the interest of time, I'm just going to keep moving. Here's something that I think Mike touched on as well. When you're dealing with fraud, it's typically not fraud with one area. It's typically fraud in several areas with respect to entitlement programs. So we've had several cases where one individual might be submitting fake pay stubs, and we get on Facebook and find that they're friends with this individual or they're working with this individual. We pull them up in the system, look at what type of documents they've been submitting, and then lo and behold, you find that they are submitting fake pay stubs as well. Or you have an example where there's an individual frauding Job and Family Services, but they're also frauding a housing program, or they're frauding other agencies like Social Security. I've had actually several cases where the individual's frauding Social Security and frauding our agency, and that can get pretty extensive with respect to the restitution owed in those types of cases. And I touched on some of this stuff here, just getting to know your surroundings. Who are the local employers? Typically, what do their types of verifications look like? Who's the one verifying that employment in those businesses or in those organizations? So get to know those people. Keep them in your contacts, because it just can make things a lot simpler and easier when you're working cases in the future. How do you get fake pay stubs? A lot of different ways. And you see people reaching out in social media, Facebook. If you do a search on Facebook for fake pay stubs, chances are you're not going to have a hard time finding someone to do it for you. If you have basic Photoshop software, you can make pay stubs. You can even search on Google how to make fake pay stubs, or just search fake pay stubs, and there's websites that you can go to where you can pay someone to have it done for you. So it's pretty incredible how brazen it is and how rampant it is. But I guess when you think about it, in this day and age with technology, it's not so far-fetched for people to be doing them homemade, or to be doing it to make a little extra money on the side. And we always joke that the people that have the resources and the creativity to do this type of thing, if they would just put it to use for legitimate reasons, that they would probably do even better than what they're doing with respect to criminal activity. And these are just there's a lot of redaction on these pages, but this is just some examples of the things that we've seen on Facebook with some cases locally where people are advertising either needing fake pay stubs, or wanting to create fake pay stubs, or looking for fake pay stubs. All right, so we're going to look at some cases, but first I'm just going to talk about this pay stub here, where the text alignment is off, the margins appear altered, they don't line up. This pay stub was brought up to our unit by a caseworker, and initially looking at it, I was thinking this thing is definitely fake, just based on the things that I'm pointing out here. So I sent this over to the employer and was very surprised to learn that it's actually 100% authentic. So some of the things I talked about, things that would tip you off, in this instance, completely unhelpful and incorrect. So it's pretty hard to spot one, and when you think you have one and it looks obvious, sometimes you'll actually surprise yourself with the results. And then here's another one where there's just a lot of information that's missing on here. All that was redacted is this person's name and the employer, but just based on the looks of it, it looks like there's just not a whole lot to the information. It looks like some information might have even been removed or altered. And this one was actually also 100% real. Now here's an example of a letter that was submitted by a client that we sent over to Job One USA, and they responded with the stuff and highlight here where basically the employer, Job One USA, talked about everything that was wrong with this letter. Now this letter is involved in one of the cases that I'm going to be highlighting here in a minute. But the logo is a logo that they said they don't even use. The phone number, the contact information for the employer was incorrect, and the start date was incorrect, and basically a lot of things were incorrect with this letter. But looking at this thing briefly as a caseworker, it looks legitimate. In this case, we were tipped off by a caseworker who compared some of the information on this letter with the information on a pay stub and found some discrepancies with regard to the pay rate. Now here's a pay stub that I'll just come out and say is fake. It's also involved in one of the cases that was prosecuted. And you can see below the year-to-date earnings, year-to-date deductions, year-to-date net pay, it looks like somebody basically just took a pen and straighten these lines out where they went in and whited out some of the information. So the math is correct on this pay stub, but what looks suspect on this is you have these boxes that are basically look like they're drawn in. So those are some of the types of things with formatting that you can look for. And here's a pay stub that everything adds up on this pay stub. Everything looks legitimate. The only thing that was altered on this was the hours and the hourly rate. This person, I believe, was making closer to $14 or $15 an hour. So they went in and altered the hours and the hourly rate and then did the math and did the deductions and did all that stuff so it added up. But this pay stub actually turned out to be altered as well. And then once more, here's another example of an altered pay stub. Here, when I talk about doing the math on these pay stubs, the hourly rate and the number of hours, 20 times 11, is 220. And you can see that whoever did this pay stub either didn't know their math or maybe that it was previously $280. But they neglected to make that correction. So that should be reading 220, but in fact they just left it at 280. So sometimes just looking at those even numbers and doing the quick math can pay off as far as detection goes. Payroll processors. So when we see cases where you have a fake pay stub or something that you're suspecting might be fake, we subpoena payroll processors, and up in the top left corner of this where it's highlighted, the company code and then the file code are highlighted. The company code will tell you who the company is that the person is working for, and then the file number will tell you it's like an employee number, like an employee ID number. So I've had cases where I've sent pay stubs to ADP or a company code and a file code, and I get a response from ADP, which I'll show you here. The response will tell me whether or not that company code matches up to the pay stub or whether or not that file number matches up to the employee. So I've had cases where it's an ADP processed pay stub, and they have several companies that they do work for, where either the company on the pay stub wasn't a customer of ADP's, or that file number, that employee number, came back to a completely different person. So if they don't change those two numbers in the top left corner, then that's another way to identify that it's in fact a fraudulent document. So this just talks about ways to get the information from payroll processors, or just in general when you're reaching out to employers. Typically I ask right away who's in their legal department, if I need to send a subpoena, so I'm not getting the runaround. And then also asking who can get done what I need to get done, so I have some contact information, so I'm not telling the same story to 3 or 4 different people basically to get the answers that I need. Now some examples of some prosecutions. I'm going to take a quick breath. If anybody has any questions about anything, I'm just going to take a few seconds here to get a drink. I know I have a lot of information to go over, so I'm sorry. I'm trying to speak quickly so I can get to this stuff and kind of spend some time on these cases. So I mentioned one of the cases being, one of the pay stubs being involved in a prosecution, and this was one of them here. We have a $60,000 case where a woman created a place of employment out of thin air, basically, in order to get child care for her children. Now, this woman legitimately did not work, was not in school, had no disabilities, so she had no qualifying need for child care. So for 7 years, she got child care based on a fraud where she said she worked at a flower shop. Now, the flower shop in question here, we did a property record search for the address that had been provided, and it came back to a vacant lot. She used templates from her ex-husband and her daughter to create fake pay stubs. And when I say templates, I'll go over that here in a minute. And then eventually she did confess to her attorney that she had made the pay stubs herself. So she involved her sister in the scheme. So when she was submitting documents to the agency as far as who the employer was and giving us a phone number to contact an employer, she gave a fake name, but she gave a phone number that was actually traced back to her sister. So if the agency called to verify her employment, they would get her sister on the line, who would verify as instructed her employment. So here's the pay stubs. The one on the left belongs to her ex-husband. I was able to figure that out. I'll go over that in a second. And then the one on the right belongs to her daughter, and I'll go over that here in a second. Starting with the pay stub that belonged to her ex-husband, and this margin here on the left, I did a Google search, and I could barely make it out at the time. I searched Reynolds & Reynolds and yielded a software company from Dayton, Ohio that specializes in accounting software specifically for car dealerships. Now, when I saw that, a light bulb went off in my head, because when I was doing a Facebook browse on the suspect, I was looking at who her relationships were, and I remembered seeing that she had an ex-husband that had worked at a car dealership as a salesman. So I quickly called that car dealership that I knew he was working at, gave them the employee number that I have marked off here in the top, and this department number, and they were able to confirm, in fact, that these pay stubs, this employee number, matched up to the suspect's ex-husband, but that the amounts were completely altered and different. So what she had done was taken copies of his pay stubs at some point and scanned them, and then added the information or adjusted the information as she saw fit. Moving on to her daughter, she pretty much did the same thing, got a template from her daughter and altered some of the information on there as she saw fit. However, the company and the file number led back to her daughter. So the file number, when I subpoenaed ADP, the file number came back as belonging to her daughter, and then the company actually came back as a place where we were able to verify her daughter was employed. So if you got some pay stubs laying around, you can basically scan them in and then make the alterations that you need to make as long as you have the software available. And then I talked about her sister being involved. This is an example of one of the letters that were submitted as an employment verification. So we did a reverse lookup on a phone number provided and found that it came back to the defendant's sister's phone number. So just little things like that, due diligence, just making sure you're being creative but also thorough. This stuff really isn't that hard to find. So the outcome of this case was several counts being indicted, 8 counts ranging from grand theft, tampering, and forgery, full restitution, wage withholding agreement. She had to basically get a job so she can start making payments on this $59,000. She did get probation, and in Ohio, policy says if you have a child care overpayment, whether it's fraud or not, that you don't get any eligibility until the balance is paid in full. Now here's another case where we have fake pay stubs totaling almost $70,000 involving food assistance, child care, and Medicaid for a length of almost 5 years. This source of this investigation was from the hotline, and one of the interesting things about this case is when I talked about if there's fraud in one area, there's fraud in others. Well, not only is there fraud across 3 programs, but this individual had 2 coworkers that were involved in fake pay stubs as well, and we were able to basically determine that this defendant's aunt was the one making the pay stubs for her and for her 2 coworkers. So these are just some quick examples of the fake pay stubs. The one on the left, we're not able to identify the source of this template. The one on the right from ADP, we were actually able to identify the source of this as being just a friend of hers on Facebook. Now, when we questioned that friend on Facebook, basically all we got was denial, but we were at least able to make a connection there. Leanne, that's a good question. What percentage of fraud hotline tips lead to prosecution? Oh man, I would say maybe 10%. There's a lot of stuff that we do in-house administratively. A lot of what we get on the hotline has to do with people misusing their food stamp card or selling their food stamp card. And then a lot of it has to do with absent parent in the home types of things. And a lot of those cases either are too low for our threshold or they are just too hard to prove. So as far as a case leading all the way up to prosecution, I think 10% would definitely be a good ballpark, which is still enough as long as we're getting a few every month. You're welcome. Here is another example of a fake pay stub when compared to the actual payroll history. We found that the pay periods on this individual's pay stubs was not correct. Some other things that we pointed out here, there's no cents included for the gross and year-to-date. The gross total doesn't balance out when you add up the period 640 plus 60 plus 10. That equals 710, not 730 and 77 cents. And then the gross year-to-date does not balance. So we already knew that these were fake because we had sent over a subpoena to the employer and got a payroll history, so we already knew, but we did a little bit of looking at some of these pay stubs that had been submitted and found some of these clerical errors, for lack of a better term. And then again, here's another example from the same case where we have inaccurate pay dates, we have figures not balancing. Another interesting thing about this case was the employer told me that they don't offer direct deposit to their employees, which was kind of a shock, but a little old-fashioned anyway. That's beside the point. Interesting part is that these fake pay stubs that were submitted had somebody getting direct deposit. And again, we did a subpoena to ADP and found that this company code and file number belonged to an employee at a different healthcare company. And when we did a Facebook search, I mentioned that we were able to link them to as Facebook friends in the very least. So there was some connection there where she at some point had gotten a copy of her pay stub to use as a template. And then another thing here too, her actual rate of pay at this time was $13 an hour. And on the pay stub, you can see that it says $9 an hour. So she was still an LPN at this point, or not an LPN at this point, but she was reporting her hourly rate as $4 less an hour. And then here is something that I wanted to get to show the prosecutor, an authentic format for the employer, for the defendant, so they could compare what the pay stub should actually look like versus what had been submitted. So there is no doubt that those pay stubs are fake, despite all the other evidence that we had collected up to this point. So the outcome of this case, again, this lady was an LPN making about $20 an hour by the time that we had finished the case. We got 8 counts indicted here, grand theft, tampering with records, forgery. She eventually did confess to the prosecutors that her aunt had created the forged pay stubs. She went into our diversion program here in Lucas County, so she had to put $10,000 down, and she's got to pay $500 a month for the next 6 years in order to avoid her felony, and then she was disqualified from the SNAP program. Now here's a case where it's a little bit of I guess, humility on our agency's part. We have a boyfriend and girlfriend living together, both using fake pay stubs, and we only indicted the girlfriend because it was her case, but her entitlement case. But the boyfriend, we tried to indict because basically he was supposed to be on the case, and he was also uttering fake documents to the agency, but the prosecutor wasn't interested in him. So they stated that they got these pay stubs directly from their employer and it had not been altered, and they submitted them to the agency. So here's one pay stub, and very plain. There's not even an employer name on here. Just looking at this, I'm just kind of, I guess, embarrassed that a caseworker took this as a reliable source of verification and went with it. So in this instance, looking at this, I would hope, and after having the discussions we've had with members of our agency, that they would see something like this, knowing what they know now and knowing exactly what we do and what we're about in our agency, that they would bring this to us immediately. And then here's another example of a pay stub where there's just so much wrong that I don't even know where to start with respect to the formatting. They didn't even take the time really to make sure that everything lined up. It's just like they slapped it together as quick as they could and got it down here. But again, unfortunately, it was submitted to the agency and it was accepted by the agency, and their eligibility was determined based on this. Now, luckily, that wasn't a factor in the prosecution. The fact that they uttered this false document was enough for the prosecutor and for the grand jury. Now, here's one that's a little more respectable as far as the correctness, I would venture to say, where they took a little bit more time with the formatting. But again, you don't have any decimal points here. There's a lot of things also wrong with this, but the main thing for me is the decimal points that are missing. You're going to have decimal points on pay stubs, and things aren't lining up here as well. So in this instance, we also had 8 counts and another round of grand theft, tampering with records, and forgery. They ended up with she ended up with 3 years in probation, and she's got to pay full restitution of $14,000, and she was also disqualified from the SNAP program. Other types of things that we see with respect to forgeries are rent receipts, leases, attendance records, enrollment records. I've seen families be used as, we talked about the other defendant's sister being used as a point of contact. I had a case where a girl was saying she was going to school in order to get child care and cash assistance, and she basically used her mom as one of her professors. So her attendance sheets that had to be submitted to show her attendance for school as verification, she had listed her mother as a professor and gave the mother's phone number. And when I called the mother, at that time, I didn't know that it was her mother, but I called and was able to identify that it was her mother, and that her mother was in fact not a professor, and had no idea what I was talking about or why I was calling, because she said her daughter was not in school. So it's always good to check up on those phone numbers and those names. When you get rent receipts or leases, call those phone numbers, or at least try to look up and identify who those phone numbers belong to, because a lot of times, unfortunately, and at least in my experience, those phone numbers don't belong to the individuals that they say that they're belonging to, or you call those phone numbers and it's a dead line. There's lots of different things that can happen other than the person that you're expecting to answer the phone actually answering it. So that leads me to the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, go ahead and feel free to ask. I have my email address listed down there in the chat box. If there's anything that you think of, please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to help, happy to offer any of my experiences. I know I moved quickly, so I believe they're going to be on here for a little bit more time as far as any questions that you might have for me, but I just want to thank everybody for inviting me to speak.
Thank you, Greg.
You're welcome.
I love all the examples. Perfect. So helpful, I'm sure, for other agencies to have those, in their back pocket, or maybe even to use as a training example, to have those fake pay stubs to look at, or the pay stubs that may look fake but are actually quite legitimate.
You never know. That's the thing. You never know until you actually get it verified. So just trust your gut and go with it. And like I said, the worst thing that could happen is you're wrong and you don't have a fraud case. I mean, they're exciting to work and stuff like that, but you don't want to see people committing fraud either.
Sure. Anyone have any questions for Greg? You can type them into the chat box, or you can raise your hand and we can unmute you.
Janae has a question. I'd probably be easier for me to speak to it than type out. So does Ohio define fraud and IPVs the same? Yes and no. An IPV is specific to the food stamp program. That's an intentional program violation. So that's a penalty where if you commit fraud, so in this instance, you lie on a form or an application, or you submit a fake pay stub, whatever that falsification is or that fraud is, it's built on a schedule. So your first instance of fraud with respect to SNAP and IPV is a 1-year disqualification. Second instance is 2 years. The third instance is permanent, unless the court decides to go outside of the schedule, which in some instances we have that happen. And then there's residency fraud. So if you are getting food stamps in one state and then come to Ohio and lie on your application and say you're not getting food stamps anywhere else, and then you start getting food stamps here, that's residency fraud, and that's an automatic 10-year disqualification. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, yes, a little, yeah. But I do, so let me ask you this. With regards to CCDF, and this is better than me just typing it, if you can't, because I know during the presentation you can't always prove fraud, right? So when you can't prove the fraud but you can see a clear violation, so that's, let's say, for example, do you guys do electronic time and attendance?
Yes. So
Ohio, okay.
yeah,
So let's say that you can't prove fraud, but there is a clear violation of program, but you can't really prove the fraud. How would that case pan out?
and with respect to child care in our agency, if we are pretty much limited by policy to only deal with recipient fraud. So I can't really answer that question as far as on the provider end goes, but I can answer on the recipient end. If we have somebody basically billing the state and they're not attending and we can't prove it, then we aren't going to be pursuing that case unless we have absolute proof with respect to child care.
Okay. Awesome. I was just wondering. What's lingering?
Yeah.
I have one other question for you, Greg. You indicated grand juries are not fond of fake pay stub cases. You want to elaborate on that a little bit for us? It was on the
PowerPoint. So juries are, when we brought that up because when we talk about interviewing people, sometimes it's really not necessary to interview anybody. It's from an evidence standpoint. I don't need someone to confess when I have all this evidence, and I can show intent through that evidence. But a lot of times, it's interesting, I guess, to say, to interview these people because you want to try to get a sense of where their mind was, and juries also typically ask me those questions about remorse. Did they feel sorry that they did what they did? And in a lot of cases, with respect to these fake documents, none of that matters to them because as soon as I start talking about what they did, as far as submitting fake pay stubs and for the length of time that it was done on a lot of cases, they're immediately shaking their heads, and there's not a whole lot more that I really need to say at that point when you can show how long that the person's been doing it and getting away with it. That tells them exactly what that person needs to know, or what that juror needs to know, is that person didn't feel sorry at all because look at how long they've been doing it, and they'd probably still be doing it had they not got caught. So yeah, jurors do not like those cases. They're definitely pretty clear cut when I go to testify. With respect to some of the other cases that I deal with like absent parents in the home, those get a little muddier. These are the most cut and dry because jurors are, frankly, they're just kind of disgusted with some of the cases when it comes to fake documents.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, and it kind of goes back to building a strong case, though, before you go before the jury as well. So you have a pretty solid case. I get it. So do we have any other questions for Greg? Thank you a lot, Greg.
No problem. I hope it was helpful for everybody, and hopefully everybody has a safe and happy 4th.
All right, so we don't have anyone typing, so we'll start with the fraud toolkit. We have a little bit more time here. So next, Mike and myself will go over some additional resources to share with you guys, and then we'll close it out, have a discussion, a little open discussion, and then close it out. So let's begin with the Fraud Toolkit. All right, so recently we released a new assessment section in the Fraud Toolkit. It's the Enforcement and Recovery section. We actually released this in January of this year. The entire CCDF Fraud Toolkit is made of five sections, but this particular assessment section has 5 categories, and it includes the regulations, procedures and coordination, appeals and adjudicating, improper payments, recovery, and sanctions and penalties. So in order for a lead agency to receive the CCDF Fraud Toolkit or any of the assessment sections, and specifically this enforcement and recovery section, you would need to send an email request, and we do have that email address that will be available for you guys shortly. And once you request the document, it's sent over to you, and it comes in an Excel format, and it looks similar to what you see on your screen. So the first sheet within that book or that assessment has various questions and selections for the answers, and it categorizes your answer based on a risk level while providing recommendations or next steps. After completing the entire assessment section, and in order to complete that, a group of individuals from the lead agency or one individual from the lead agency would go through each section. After completing it, the tool automatically calculates your risk levels. And here we can see the various risk levels based on categories and an overall risk level summary. And based on those risk levels, the lead agency has the opportunity to go in and do some internal mitigations to take care of those gaps, those program gaps as it relates to program integrity, specifically for this assessment, enforcement, and recovery. All right. So again, if you guys are interested in receiving the new release enforcement and recovery section, we'll happily send those over to you guys via email. And with that, I will now transfer it over to Mike so he can go over the additional program resources.
Thank you, Janae. Just wanted to make everybody aware of the resources that are out there. We covered a lot of information today, and we did it pretty quickly. So not to fear, because we've got lots of resources out there for you to follow up with. And you can see on this page that there's a link at the top. And then also want to point to the web links that are down in the box on the right-hand side, and you can see we have the NICSIA program integrity resources there too. So if you're looking for more information on the Fraud Toolkit, it's there. Program integrity webinars, either the presentations themselves or the documentation that went with them, we've got it there. Some risk assessment tools for you to look at as well. Fiscal fundamentals, lots of good information for you all if you need it. If you need any help finding it, just reach out to your regional office, and we'll get you some help in finding what you need. In addition to that, Katie talked about the error rate process today, and we've got some great resources to assist states with that. And again, here's the link for that, and you can see down in the right-hand side that we have the link, the web link again for CCDF error rate resources. So wanted to make sure that everybody is aware of that. If you need help finding any resources, reach out to your regional office, and if they need help from us, they'll let us know. And with that, I think we're down to the final part about any just open discussion. Any questions that you all have, go ahead and put it in the chat box, and we'll try and answer them now. If we can't do it today, we'll be sure to follow up and get your questions answered.
Thank you, Mike. This is Leanne again. I'm not seeing anyone typing into the chat box. So I'm going to go ahead and move us to our closeout. But if anything comes up, feel free to type it in there. So our next webinar is scheduled for Tuesday, September 1st at 3 o'clock Eastern Time. Oh, and I'm sure it would be helpful if I move the slides. We have not yet decided on a topic for that webinar, so please feel free to place your ideas in the chat box or within the evaluation. If I can just move you quick to that web links pod at the top right of your screen, that last link is to a webinar evaluation. We really appreciate your feedback on these webinars so that we can continue to improve and offer you sessions that are meaningful to your CCDF program integrity work. So please it should take less than 5 minutes to complete that evaluation for us. We do appreciate that. So in just another minute here, I'm going to be turning off the audio, but I will leave the room open for a few minutes. So if anyone would like to download any of the resources here in the resources pod, including the fraud toolkit, you can go ahead and do that. Or if there's any other final questions that you may have, you can enter those as well. Big shout out and thank you to our NICSIA team here for all of your hard work on this webinar and hosting it twice, and especially to Greg in Ohio for all of the great strategies and examples that he shared as well today. I hope everyone has a fun and safe 4th of July weekend. Thank you for joining us.